Hello, my friends, Evolutionary Energy Arts family. So, guys, I just wanted to do a quick video just to let you know about something you might not have heard of before. We just did a video over on the first channel, Evolutionary Energy Arts, and just talking about what's going on, what's part of the bigger plan here as we see the Western world, Western societies in chaos, the planet's in chaos. The planet's been in chaos for a long time, though. And what we're seeing is just the unraveling of society as, the left versus the right is literally coming to blows in the streets now, not just in the US, but in the UK as well.
It really is. I mean, things are really getting hot and intense.
And so much of, everything is conditioning. We've been conditioned since childhood. We were talking before about how by the time you're 7, basically the pattern is laid and it's tough to break out.
It's extremely hard because it's almost like hardwiring. Software is something that can be changed around. Hardwiring is very difficult to change.
And so the video title that we just did on the first channel is plain and simple, they're weakening the West to allow for a Red Dawn scenario, which is coming shortly. And obviously this would be a huge war. And when we look at certain terms and certain things there's some things that just trigger certain automatic patterned responses because we've heard it time and time and time again. I've shared with you guys too that like my dad was brought up Catholic, and he went through Catholic school the whole way, graduating high school out of a Catholic school, and talked about the nuns whacking him on with the ruler on the hands, and the whole way it was growing up. And those that have been brought up in Christianity, most of us have at least somewhere in our brain the knowledge of what we term Armageddon, Tribulation, Revelation. These words trigger certain thoughts, the Antichrist, the beast, all this. And it's so deeply rooted in our psyches that it's almost impossible to get certain things out. And again, sometimes things are not as they seem, and we need to, take a step back and recognize that perhaps we are being used to create the situations as well.
Absolutely. And even the word apocalypse isn't, as horrifying as it sounds. It's a matter of awakening and understanding the truth.
And so, when you hear of apocalypse, people think end of the world. Well, you hear of Armageddon, you think, oh, the battle that's going to lead to the end of the world, or the battle that is the end of the world, the final battle. Not necessarily the case, even though, apocalypse really can mean the great unveiling. And we're also kind of looking at the great unveiling and unraveling right now.
Definitely unraveling.
Things are completely unraveling. And yet more people than ever are waking up to the fact that everything is manipulation by the few over the many. And so I'm going to take you over to this. And so Jean Dixon was a very famous astrologer and somebody that was believed, at least by herself and some others, to have an amazing gift of prophecy, as she seemed to accurately predict the Kennedy assassination. Now, as I've said before too, some of these prophets have been tied in very high places. And, Nostradamus, as I said, he was the seer for kings and queens and in there in the court. And you just got to wonder, are the prophecies helping us to create this? Are they warning us? Are they conditioning us? In quantum physics, we recognize that we create our own reality. And that is a simple fact. Yet, even people that perhaps are totally oblivious to these facts can see the world situation and think, well, things are going to hell in a handbasket, so to speak. Baba Vanga is another one, and she's a famous seeress and a blind lady, obviously, as you could see here. Now, both of these women have made a lot of prophecies, and both of these women have missed on an awful lot of prophecies. There are multiple timelines, perhaps, in which things can happen, and things are not really so set in stone.
Well, they're not set in stone, and they might even be misunderstood, as far as how it's perceived and how the information comes to them. Because, psychics and prophets, they get it wrong sometimes. And I do believe that has to do with the timeline and what is the most probable thing to happen.
So here you see a quote, Armageddon will come in 2020. So you would think, you might think that, oh my God, that means the end of the world's in 2020, but not necessarily the case. And perhaps we could have the Battle of Armageddon and not have the end of the world when we look closely at the actual texts and what it means. Now, Armageddon is basically a place, and it's changed. There's symbolism involved, and so just like with the word daemon, right? Demon, D-E-M-O-N, and I've been meaning to make a video on this. Comes from daemon, D-A-E-M-O-N, which originally was a nature spirit, not really a bad connotation, but over time, it's gotten to mean a demonic force. And yeah, there are what we would call dark, evil, horrible, malevolent forces. But again, things have been lumped together. Things have been jumbled up. Meanings have been twisted and misunderstood. So I do find it very interesting that it does look like we are heading into perhaps the beginning of World War III, perhaps in 2020. Now, there's other ways you could look at it, too. Perhaps we are looking at the Battle of Armageddon in some ways where people are coming up and rebelling against everything. They're rebelling against society. You have certain races rebelling against other races, ideologies rebelling, the left rebelling against the right rebelling against the left, countries rebelling against organizations, with leaving things like the WHO, what President Trump did with pulling funding. It certainly would be a wonderful thing if we did have a true revolution of thought and recognize that there are other ways we could do things besides the same ways that things have been done for thousands of years, which have led to nothing but strife and war and famine and disease and control and the absolute inequality of people to such a degree where people just can't stand it anymore because it's ridiculous. The inequality is atrocious. There should never be such a situation. And yet, in capitalist societies, we are brought up with the whole thought that communism is evil. Well, communism doesn't really exist on this planet. There's communist, quote-unquote, countries, but really they're dictatorships. They're not communists because in a communist situation, everybody would be equal. We've never had everybody equal. So there really is no, true communist society. There's, again, the same condition as always where there's labels used, but in reality, power corrupts and the people in charge take control, and then you have oligarchies and dictatorships, and that's what we have. Russia's not communist. China's not communist. When we look at what's happening to the Uyghurs, if they were communist, would President Xi Jinping, shouldn't he be having the same sort of life and lifestyle as the Uyghurs who are locked up in concentration camps making Nike shoes? It's not communist. It's a dictatorship. And, I've quoted before saying that, and people don't like to hear this, but Christ was actually more of a communist. He lived in a communal setting where people shared things. That's what that means. People shared equally and didn't necessarily have possessions. We're here in our capitalist societies. We've been taught it's great to go out and acquire the American dream. You got to have a bigger car. First, you got to have you got to get the house. You have to, have the well-paying job, the corporate. security, because it's under the corporations that you'll find your security in this society. You need your health insurance, you need your 401k, all these things you have to have, ever bigger, ever more expansive, ever deeper in debt to the corporations. And again, we've just been sold a bill of goods, because it's not really the true way things should be.
No, we've been sold a bill of goods on many different levels, spiritually, physically, on all kinds of levels. We've been told what we need to think, do, eat, say on every level.
And so when we see this prophecy that she gave us here, so as we see Jean Dixon, a psychic who famously did predict JFK's assassination. So she claimed that, the way she put it too, she says Armageddon will come in 2020 when the false prophet, Satan, and the Antichrist will rise up and battle man himself. So this is from a book called The End of Days. And that's getting it really from the book of Revelation. And it's kind of the traditional line of thought without looking into the symbolism and recognizing things like the seven churches, can represent the seven chakras, and we can be talking about consciousness. And how do we get to a new heaven and a new earth? Well, it's through a change in consciousness. But she's taken things literally, as so many people did take things literally. But it doesn't mean that she might not be right about the actual date of the battle of quote-unquote Armageddon being in 2020, as we see what's going on right now. It is a real possibility that World War III can break out between China and other allied nations against the U.S. and other nations. So interesting to think about this.
It's extremely interesting, and I do believe certain people are sensitive enough to pick up on these timelines.
And so Baba Vanga also made predictions that some interpret as being President Putin and President Trump's lives. Both of their lives might be in danger in this year, which is interesting in and of itself. Who knows what's going to happen with this election, if there is an election selection in the first place. And again, either way, whatever the outcome is, there's going to be a whole bunch of unhappy people, as we see that we are being completely split into two different camps that at this point are actually coming to blows in the streets.
We are, and it's really, really sad and unfortunate to watch how we are falling the way we are. And it's not, I'm not talking to anyone here personally, because I think if you're listening to this video, you're more awake than that, but you can definitely look outside yourself and see how things are crumbling.
So Baba Vanga said the wolves will be howling in a bush. Now that's kind of interesting, isn't it? But the wolves will be howling in a bush and innocent blood will be gushing. But other things as well. And so they take it to be that there will be an ominous cloud that will fall over President Trump, who is rumored to fall ill with mysterious illness that will leave him deaf and suffering a brain tumor, even death. And she also foretold that Europe will fall at the hands of extremists who will unleash hell with an arsenal of chemical weapons. It is interesting. Nostradamus does talk about France in particular, but Europe in general, and saying there will be those that will come in hiding weapons of mass destruction, basically, under their clothes, under their coats and stuff. And in some cases, they're going to burn cities to the ground. Does almost sound, like nuclear weapons as well. So Jean Dixon claimed Armageddon would take place in 2020, and that Jesus will return to defeat the unholy trinity of Antichrist, Satan, and the false prophet between 2020 and 2037. And she had passed away back in January of 1997. So maybe she did see the war breaking out in 2020. We shall find out. Now, she was also highly regarded by both the Nixon administration and the Reagan administration, and she was their astrologer, and she had ties to Nancy Reagan on a deeper basis. So it's really, really curious. She actually predicted the year and the day in which the Antichrist would be born. Now, I didn't find anybody of significant note born on this day, and it was February 5th, 1962. But there was a solar eclipse, and maybe that's why, being an astrologer, she took it to be a particularly dark and evil one. And so, perhaps that's why she came up with that prediction.
Well, yeah, the eclipses are to shed light on the darkness, and usually that can turn out being pretty ugly.
There's been so many people over the years that have said the end of the world's going to be this date and that date and this date and that date and this date, and none of them ever come. And also, when we look back through time, think about even the Roman Empire. Think about if you were living in Israel, well, in Palestine back in the day, in Jerusalem, and say it's 69 AD, and you could feel the oppression of the Roman Empire upon you, and destruction of Jerusalem would be less than a year away. It would feel very apocalyptic. It would feel very, very Armageddon-ish. And if you were alive and witnessing it in those days, boy, it would have such an impact on you to see the temple burned down, to see people going into another diaspora, being taken away like they had been and spread out all over the globe. Ultimately, this has happened to many different countries and many different peoples over the years. And of course, in the Roman world too, you had to go along with the system. You had no choice. Otherwise, how could you function? Or you might even just be killed on the spot. And as the world is descending into chaos at this moment, we need to remember that, even though things look bleak, at so many other times, it looked like it was the end of everything. World War I, World War II. And there again, even if the Battle of Armageddon really is starting in 2020, so to speak, and again, it's a symbolic thing in so many ways, she did predict up to 2037, and she was wrong so many times as so many others are as well, because there is free choice. Things are not completely set in stone. We are all creating our own reality every step of the way.
We really, really are, and I think one really important thing to do while we listen to this and look at it is always pull yourself back into the now. That's important.
So guys, as always, thank you for your support on both Patreon and also on Ko-Fi. I hope you all are subscribed to both channels. Stay safe, stay positive out there, recognize that we are co-creating, and so let's use our power for the better of all.
Let's do. God bless and namaste.
God bless and namaste.